Thank you also to the organizing committee to have me here today. It's my pleasure to be here. Come all the way from England, Nottingham Trent University, and I'm very happy to be able to talk to you a little bit this morning about my research. I've been researching into internet use, technology use, mobile phone use, etc. for nearly 10 years now. You can't believe how quickly time is passing, particularly when you're having fun. With that kind of research, I've learned quite a number of things about people who are experiencing problems with their internet and technology use, but I've also learned how important the internet and technology use is in our everyday lives. And I'm sure my colleagues would agree that we are using the internet, we are using technology all the time, most of the time in a very healthy manner. However, today I'm going to be primarily talking about internet addiction, how individuals may get addicted to actually using the internet. So what can you expect from my talk this morning? I'll be talking about or asking the question, what is internet addiction? What is gaming addiction? Does it actually exist? What do we know about this? So as a researcher, my perspective is particularly looking into the kind of research that has been published. And I'm also going to give you a little bit of an indication about treatment. What kind of treatment exists? What is effective treatment? What do we know today about treatment that actually works for individuals who are suffering with the actual problems of excessive internet use, excessive gaming use? So, looking at these scenarios here, what is internet addiction? Have a look at that young gentleman in that right-hand corner. It seems as if he was living in a virtual reality, doesn't it? Probably the game that he's playing is a game that he really enjoys. Probably it's a kind of virtual reality that might be more fun than reality, than real life. Maybe it's a reality that gives him things in his real life that he doesn't necessarily have on an everyday basis. Then we can have another look at the gentleman who's there praying to the computer. Obviously, we can't take these things at face value. However, if you have a look at what is written underneath it, give a person a fish and they eat for a day. Give that person the internet and they won't bother you for weeks. And that's really an indication about the kind of time that we spend nowadays engaged in technology. When we walk the streets in Nottingham, then we see most people, young and old, they are looking on their phones, they are not even looking up. Sometimes it's really tricky because you'd be bumping into people, they are so engrossed in their technology. And I've seen on the streets of Istanbul, it appears to be quite normal as well to be engaged with technology. Technology seems to take away quite a substantial portion of the time that we have. And I think this might be an indication of an excessive use of technology for extended periods of time. So just to give you a little bit of an indication of where the problem might lie. Then we've got another little cartoon here on the right bottom, a person who thinks that he is not actually addicted to the internet. Well, there seems to be a lack of awareness of a potential problem. And this is, of course, something that needs to be taken into consideration. Now, I was asked today to talk about treatment specifically, and I wanted to give you an example of the kinds of treatments that are currently available for internet addiction, internet use-related problems, and gaming addiction. If the gentleman could put the video on. I've got a short video for you, which gives you an indication about the kind of treatment that is available currently in China. Quite interesting, and I hope you bear with me a few minutes in order to see this video. As you can see, this is a New York Times opinion piece on China's web junkies, published about a couple of years ago or so. This is a treatment center.
把信交给
我。你干什么事儿了？
我在家扫不是我妈妈说带我到北京来看病的，他就把我关在这里，他们就是把我的手捆住，
example of the kinds of games that are being played by individuals who are treated at that center.
朋友带我去网吧玩游戏，玩着玩着，然后呢，家长知道了，然后就开始和家长吵，然后呢就开始吵，然后就进这里，摔着早就回来，妈开始说，然后我就蒙着被子开始坐起来听。
在那住了3天，然后回来，感觉还是蛮不错的。
坐着玩。
发现大于6个小时的，每天非工作学习目的，一定是非工作学习目的上网，大于6个小时的人最容易成瘾。
我们在收治的这个网络成瘾这个青少年里边啊，有的很多孩子上网是我们正常人不可想象的，有的孩子在上网上到非常极端的时候了，怕这个上厕所连解小便什么的影响他上网打游戏，他带上尿不湿，就是我们所以说称为他电子海洛因。
也就改变了，就比如说跟你说话的方式啊，别的依然还是一开口就是学习，没别的。对，和这个家庭关系完全不关那个。
上回我妈说，刚说来北京，我以为是找心理医生呢。又找这件事，说你来就知道了。然后进来了，感觉不对，结果被教官硬拉上了。
然后我爸立马就同意了，我在家先玩了1个月电脑，不是去了3个月吗？然后1个月过后就4个月了。
他们说我有网瘾，我不信，真的不信。
批评、指责、教训，哎呀，就是觉得这些话最能刺激你，最能让你改变，最能让你反省，最能让你进步。那么他们病态的心理实践，就是说这些孩子来打击的孩子一个的内心世界就是孤独。你了解他吗？他孤独。那么他想让谁陪伴他呢？到网络世界去了。上知天文，在网上玩的，上知天文，下知地理，中不通人情。那他罪恶的之心，在每天的培育。
妈妈，我真的很痛苦。我不是不能玩电脑痛苦，而是寂寞的痛苦。我无聊，我苦苦哀求你，我真的活不下去了。我儿子自从上网以后就变了一个人，变得冷酷无情，什么办法都没用。这个强制性把他吃的那个安眠药把他送到这里，我们是浙江的。
So, what does the audience think? Drastic measures? Is that the kind of treatment that we would provide here in Istanbul? Probably not so much. Well, I think this is an example of treatment that is being provided in different kinds of contexts. I can assure you that treatment in Europe looks slightly differently. This is an example of the Ambulanz für Spielsucht, the outpatient clinic for gaming addictions, the first and largest research and specialized treatment center in Europe. This is based in Germany, in Mainz. And there, our colleagues are providing outpatient treatments for individuals who are suffering from internet use-related problems, particularly gamers. So it is primarily gamers who are seeking support. However, there are also individuals suffering with excessive use of social networking sites, mobile phone use, some online pornography, as well as addictive use of other online technologies. And this kind of Ambulanz für Spielsucht, it's actually a very, very good place because they are the first to have published an actual treatment manual, a treatment manual of computer game and internet addiction. And I don't know of any such manual in any other country. So what we hope to do in the future would be to translate that treatment manual, which primarily uses cognitive behavioral therapy, so it can be used by our colleagues here in Istanbul and around the world as well. So please bear with us, depending on the amount of time we will have in the future to be able to translate this. In that particular facility, treatment is provided that has been shown to be very effective, that has been shown to help individuals who are suffering, and the individuals who are being treated there are primarily adults aged 16 and above, who are receiving both individual as well as group-based treatment. So this is another example of treatment, how it can potentially be provided. And I'll give you a few more examples based on the research evidence base that we have to the present day. Now, what is the issue? When we talk about internet and gaming addiction, what do we actually mean by that? I know we all have some sort of ideas in our heads, and the speakers yesterday have also provided us with a lot of information about internet and gaming addiction. Now, let me provide you with some statistics. We have put together statistics based on the prevalence rates as shown in a number of countries, prevalence rates particularly for adolescent users of the internet and gaming. And as you can see from those prevalence rates, they are very, very different. For example, in Italy, very low rates, under 1%. 0.8% have been reported of individuals, young individuals, excessively using the internet and potentially being addicted to using the internet. However, in other samples, for example, Hong Kong, up to 27%. Imagine this, 27% of adolescents are supposedly addicted to the internet. So how is it possible that we have such drastically different prevalence rates? I think Mark touched upon this yesterday already. What we're doing is to use different kinds of measurement instruments. I think at the moment we've got 30 or 40 plus different measurement instruments for internet and gaming addiction. So of course you won't be able to actually compare results from one study to the other study. We're using different cutoff points. There is no universally accepted gold standard for internet addiction assessment, and therefore there is no universally accepted standards, gold standard actually, for treating internet and or gaming addiction. And this is the main issue with our research field, and that's the main issue with the clinical field as well. Just to give you a little bit of an insight into the problematic that we see. Now, when we think about the internet, we think about being addicted to activities on the internet, not necessarily to using the medium itself. We are not addicted to the technology. We have computers at home, we have our tablets at home. We are not necessarily addicted to it, but what people can potentially get addicted to are the activities that you engage in on the internet. So what kind of an activity am I referring to here? What could that be? Yes, surfing the web, yeah? Online surfing, information search, using Google, etc. One link is going to provide you to the next link. You're clicking your way through the internet. Online shopping? Anybody likes to use eBay? Amazon? Maybe? Yeah, some people nodding, okay. Online romance, online dating, yeah, a booming market. 1 in 4 marriages in the United States have started on the internet. 25% of couples in the United States have met on the internet. Surprising? Maybe some of you have met their partner online. Who knows? Okay, other activities, cybersexual encounters, online pornography. I know there's going to be an interesting talk later on this morning talking about online pornography as well, so I would recommend you go and see that. Using messengers, using different kinds of chat rooms, weblogs, Yeah, people like to read them, people like to write them. Mark likes to write his weblog. I strongly recommend it to you. Other people using online gambling, okay? As you can see, this can be a very effective way of anonymous gambling as well. Online gaming, one of the most popular forms of internet use and one of the potentially most problematic uses of the internet. And then, of course, we've got problems with social networking site addiction. Some individuals who are excessively using social networking sites for communication, but also to play those casual browser games that are being offered by social networks, such as Facebook, Twitter, etc. So I want to make clear, when I talk about internet addiction, I'm not talking about being addicted to the medium, but I'm more talking about actual addictions to any kinds of behaviors you can engage in on the internet, some of which have a higher potential to be problematic than others. Let's have a look at social networking, shall we? Social networking is a phenomenon that I'm sure is very familiar to all of you. Who of you have got Facebook accounts? Yeah? Yeah? Okay. Most, I can see, great. What about Twitter? Yeah? Okay, quite popular as well. Any other accounts that you like using? Have we got any examples? Snapchat. Yeah? Lots of people using Snapchat, quite popular in Turkey. Any other examples? MySpace? Bit old school, old-fashioned. Instagram? Yeah, yeah. Okay, it's great. So I can see that most of you are using at least 3 different types of social networks. Isn't that amazing? How much time are you spending on your social networks every day? 10 minutes? Half an hour? 2 hours? I think Zahir spends at least 3 hours. No? I know Hali is spending at least 2 hours on his Twitter accounts every day, updating his status. I'm here at the International Congress of Technological Addictions. Please join me for interesting plenary sessions. Okay, so as you can see, technology is being used on an everyday basis, on a regular basis by most of us, and I think rightly so. However, some individuals use it to an excessive degree. As we have seen, as research has suggested, if we use social networking sites excessively, there are a number of negative consequences that can be the result of that kind of use. So obviously, there will be a decrease in your real-life community participation. If you spend most of your time on Facebook, there will be little time left to engage with your real-life communities, engage with your peers, engage with your family. In addition to this, there will be problems also in your academic achievement or any kind of job-related performance. If you're spending most of your time at work checking out your Twitter account and making sure you update your status, there won't be enough time really to spend for you engaging in your work activities, will there? Relationship problems. Cyberstalking has been reported quite frequently in the recent literature, where romantic partners are actually stalking their partners on Facebook in order to see what kinds of new friends have they got, what is happening on their online profiles. This is quite a common activity, particularly when I talk to my students. They often tell me, Daria, there are things going on that might be quite problematic there. So, as you can see, excessive use of social networking sites can have detrimental impacts for some individuals. Recently, there has been a study, a representative study published in Germany, and this is the first study of its kind. It has actually shown us, and this is quite surprising for both the research as well as the clinical community, indicating that among young teenagers aged 14 to 16 years, the prevalence rate of internet addiction, and particularly social networking site addiction, is higher in females than it is in males. Now, we all know in the addiction field that any types of addictions are significantly more strongly represented in the male population than in female populations. We also thought up to that day that actually internet addiction, very often associated with gaming-related problems, is more prevalent in young men rather than females. However, this representative study has now shown us that's not necessarily the case. 14 to 16-year-old girls show more problems than 14 to 16-year-old boys in Germany. That might have to do with their problem awareness, but I think that kind of information actually already gives us some food for thought, particularly also for treatment provision, where in clinics the kind of problematic might appear less frequently in females, as it could be considered to be a quiet addiction in their population. Gaming. Now, my main research is on gaming. I've always found it very interesting to understand why people spend countless hours playing games, sometimes to excess. Based on this, I came up with a kind of a framework based on the research that has been published on gaming addiction, came up with that kind of framework where you can see that gaming addiction starts off with a number of risk factors which might increase the individual's vulnerability to developing addiction-related problems. Certain personality traits are associated with an increased risk. So my research, for example, showed that individuals who are less agreeable, individuals who are more neurotic, who are more lonely are more likely to experience problems as a consequence of their excessive gaming. Motivations for playing games might be related to gaming addiction. For example, escapist motivations. Yeah, if you try to escape from your real life by using games, you're more likely to develop problems as a consequence of your excessive gaming, and others. Once we've got those risk factors, some individuals, those who are more vulnerable to developing problems, might actually develop a full-blown addiction. An addiction as we would categorize it, as we would diagnose it in clinical settings. And this is something that I'd like to draw your attention to. So how can we actually assess addiction? What do we mean when we say addiction? Now, according to the DSM-4, interestingly, that kind of definition isn't present in the DSM-5 anymore. So the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, a mental disorder is classified by being a clinically significant behavioral or psychological syndrome or pattern that occurs in an individual and that's associated with present distress, a painful symptom, or disability, impairment in one or more important areas of functioning, okay? And that's the case for any mental disorder. So when we think about mental disorders from a classification perspective, they actually lie on a continuum from normal behaviors up to abnormal behaviors or pathological behaviors, and any kinds of behaviors will be somewhere in there in between. So if we think about internet use, we're all using the internet. Our internet use might be somewhere in the middle. However, individuals who have problems with their internet use, they might be at the more excessive kind of an end, okay? And that's the case for any kinds of disorders, behavioral disorders, mental disorders. And particularly when we think about internet addiction, we need to think about that kind of impairment, which really distinguishes normal behavior, healthy behavior, from potentially pathological behavior, and that is quite crucial. So if significant impairment is present, then we can potentially think about a diagnosis. And Mark has been talking about that yesterday as well. Only if that kind of conflict arises, intrapsychic conflict, interpersonal conflict, conflict in the person's life, then can we potentially claim that that person might be addicted to using the internet or addicted to anything else. Now, you may be aware that with the DSM-5, the new introduction of the DSM-5 in 2013, a new category has been introduced, and that is that of addiction disorders or addictive disorders, really changing the diagnostic landscape. Because what has happened for the first time in diagnostic history is to include behavioral addictions. And as you might be aware, pathological gambling has been included as the first and only official mental disorder, behavioral addiction, that is considered and officially recognized as mental disorder. Now, of course, this might really lead us to believe that there might be other behavioral addictions that might be potentially worthy of inclusion. Internet gaming disorder has now been included in the research appendix, and the appendix where conditions that still need future research are included. And I think I've also got, later on in a slide, I've got the kind of criteria that are currently being used. What I think is very important is to understand addictions as a syndrome, and this has been proposed by Schaffer and his colleagues already quite a while back. That would basically mean that any kinds of addictions, both substance-related as well as behavioral addictions, can be understood under the addiction umbrella, meaning that behaviors such as, for example, alcohol consumption, excessive alcohol use, cannabis use, but also gambling and gaming can be classified under a similar umbrella. And I think it's quite important to view these kinds of problematics as there appear a number of similarities. I'm not not going to go into detail in this, given that I've got a limited amount of time available, but those of you who are interested, I'd strongly recommend reading the Schaffer paper, where they describe how all addictions share similar risk factors, so similar risk factors that actually predispose an individual or increase the vulnerability of an individual to potentially develop an addiction, any type of addiction, substance-related or behavioral addiction, leading to stress and relief, so using that kind of addictive behavior in order to cope with everyday life problems. However, okay, no problem. I need to slow down, so hopefully you can still, I can still get my point across for the translation. Are we all following? You still with me? Yes? Okay, I'll try to slow down nevertheless. Thank you. So finally, the difference between those addictions is the fact that they might express themselves differently. Similar vulnerabilities, similar coping mechanisms, however, the expression of the addiction, as you can see, is different, and related problems might be different as well. For example, drinking behaviors can lead to liver cirrhosis, okay? Smoking can lead to lung cancer. Gambling can lead to gambling debt. And then, of course, we've also got gaming, and gaming can lead to very significant and specific problems as well. For example, on a physiological level, vitamin D deficiency, one of the characteristics that have been associated with excessive gaming. So as you can see, different types of addictive behaviors can be classified in that kind of a framework. Now, going back to that research that I was talking to you about, how can we classify internet addiction? What is the possibility for us as both researchers and clinicians to use diagnostic criteria in order to find out, is that person addicted or are they not, or are they just highly engaged in using the technology? As I've stated, the APA has now introduced internet gaming disorder as a preliminary research diagnosis in the DSM-5, open for discussion. This kind of diagnosis is based on Tao Ran's criteria. So in the video we've seen Tao Ran, who's leading that Internet Addiction Treatment Center. It's done a lot of research on that problematic, and those criteria are based on a study in China. Internet gaming disorder, according to that definition, is a persistent and recurrent use of the internet to engage in games, often with other players. So you've got that social element, which appears to be quite crucial there, leading to a clinically significant impairment. And that's crucial for any type of mental disorder, a clinically significant impairment or distress as indicated by 5 or more of the following symptoms. And I won't go over all of them, but I'll give you just a little bit of an insight there. Preoccupation or salience. The person is continuously thinking about internet use. They're thinking about the next time they can log on to their game. They think about who they want to contact on Facebook. They're thinking about it all the time. First thing in the morning, last thing at night. Withdrawal symptoms, and they are both psychological as well as physiological in nature. Feeling moody, withdrawn, a little bit depressed, sometimes having the shakes, heart palpitations. These kinds of withdrawal symptoms have been reported by individuals who are suffering from internet use-related problems. Tolerance, very contested. We'll move to the next one because we might start a debate, and given that time might be a bit tricky. Unsuccessful attempts to control using the internet. So even though you might know that you've got a problem, you are still using it. Similar to an alcoholic who knows that they might be drinking too much, but they'll still have that other glass of wine or any other spirit that they like to consume. And a number of other criteria. So these 9 criteria are the criteria that are nowadays used often in research to classify people who might be potentially addicted to using online games. There are a number of issues. They are highly contested. We've written about this a lot in the past. Those of you interested, we've recently published a response to a so-called consensus paper suggesting that there might be an international consensus with regards to internet addiction criteria. And our opinion on that is actually the consensus does not exist. No gold standard exists for diagnosis, no gold standard exists for treatment, and that's problematic. Which leads me to move on to probably the bit that you're more interested in, which is the treatment bit. So what I'm going to do with regards to the treatment, I will be briefly summarizing to you the result of a number of empirical studies that have been conducted on internet and gaming addiction in order to show you what do we know about treatment, what do we know about treatment efficacy, what kinds of treatments are currently used, and how do they work for the individuals who are receiving that treatment. Those results are based on the clinical studies of treatment provision as well as treatment seekers that have been published up until last year. We found 152 studies, however, based on our inclusion criteria, only 46 were included, and these were studies that included actual treatment seekers and or clinical interventions for individuals who are suffering from internet addiction and or gaming addiction. Those studies were published in different languages: English, Spanish, Portuguese, Polish, German, French. Unfortunately, we didn't include any Turkish studies. I'm sure they are available as well. Those studies included 4 main types of clinical research, and I'll be referring to each one of them in order to give you a little bit of an insight into what has been found. First, we've got the treatment seeker characteristics. Who are the people who are actually seeking treatment, professional help for their problems? Then psychopharmacotherapy, psychological therapy, and combined treatment, often combining psychological therapies with either pharmacotherapy or other psychological treatments. And as I say, I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of that kind of treatment, those treatment studies. A large majority of the included studies included treatment seekers, so individuals who are looking for support for their internet use related problems. Of those studies included, we had case studies just involving one individual, but also large samples of nearly 2,000 patients or clients in both inpatient and outpatient treatment centers. Those have been studies from international samples, including individuals that have been sampled across 5 continents, 13 countries, already given us an insight into how the treatment landscape looks like in the world, not necessarily only in Europe. Classification, as always, is one of the biggest problems of that field. Psychometric scales, different types of psychometric scales have been used, sometimes combined with clinical interviews, which is particularly the case for individuals who've actually gone in to see their psychotherapist to talk to them about their problems. Not surprisingly, a high number of comorbidities were mentioned in these studies. And for those of you who are working in clinical settings, you will find that comorbidities are the norm, not the exception. That's the case for internet addiction, but that's also the case for most mental disorders. Mental disorders don't happen in isolation, and neither does technology addiction, any kind of internet or gaming-related addiction. Mostly mentioned with regards to comorbidities, co-occurring disorders were anxiety disorders, social phobia, social anxiety, generalized anxiety disorder, obsessive-compulsive disorder, but also mood disorders. Mood disorders are very common: depression, dysthymia, mania, sometimes bipolar disorder as well. ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, mentioned quite frequently in the studies as well. Psychotic disorders, any kind of schizophrenia spectrum disorders, certainly not as prevalent as mood disorders and anxiety disorders, however, they also co-occur. Substance-related addictions, so people who engage excessively with the internet sometimes also excessively engage with using substances, nicotine, alcohol, marijuana, but also cocaine have been reported. Other behavioral addictions, interestingly, addictions such as gambling, but also shopping or eating disorders, binge eating, has been reported in those studies as well. And personality disorders, underlying narcissistic personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder, and a number of other comorbidities. So as you can see from these kinds of treatment seeker characteristics, these are actual clinical samples who are experiencing problems not only with their internet use, but also with regards to other mental disorders, mood, anxiety, etc., other problems. There might be underlying issues. And then for us as researchers, but also as clinicians, the question is, can we view internet and gaming addiction as a primary disorder that needs immediate treatment, or is it more of a secondary disorder? And I'm always asked this question, particularly by clinicians, so how are we going to use that? How are we going to treat it? How are we going to define it? Well, as clinicians, what we need to do is to take into consideration the individual circumstances. For some people, the excessive internet use might be so problematic that this is the first thing that we need to treat. However, if you've got an underlying substance addiction, then you might be better off actually treating that first and then moving on to the gaming-related problems. Okay, so we have to use our clinical judgment in order to be able to provide the best treatment there. Psychopharmacotherapy has been used in 5 studies, really using medication in order to treat internet and gaming-related problems. Primarily, antidepressants have been used, and that's because, very commonly mood disorders are being experienced by individuals who are suffering from internet addiction, gaming addiction. Very often, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors are being provided, SSRIs. They are very effective in treating depression. They're also very effective in treating internet and gaming-related problems. However, what the studies also show is that they have tremendous side effects with increasing fatigue for patients who are using it, side effects with decreased sex drive, side effects that are commonly reported in depression treatment as well. So you really have to use your clinical judgment with regards to whether the benefits outweigh the side effects in that circumstance. Anxiolytics very commonly used. They are typically used for anxiety disorders in order to treat anxiety disorders, sometimes also used in the treatment of internet addiction. Stimulants, particularly used for ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, in some cases used for internet use related problems, and antipsychotics used for schizophrenia spectrum disorders. Generally, what these studies, not many studies, but based on these 5 studies, what we can say is psychopharmacotherapy appears to be effective for individuals who are having problems with their internet and gaming use. As clinicians, we need to be aware, however, of the side effects, and there has to be a very clear indication that the individuals are actually having problems that go beyond the internet use itself. In addition to this, psychological therapy has been used, primarily based on cognitive behavioral therapy principles. 10 studies have been published that use these kinds of methods. Individual and group therapy formats have been used both individually as well as in combination. And I think this is a really, really good possibility for patients to, on the one hand, use the one-on-one contact with their psychotherapist, but also, on the other hand, to use the group therapy setting where they can sit together with individuals who are actually experiencing similar problems. And this has been seen to be quite beneficial to have that support network. It has worked for people who were suffering from a number of substance-related addictions as well, and it works for individuals suffering with internet-related problems. Cognitive behavioral therapy typically includes very brief sessions over a short period of time, 8 to 28 sessions, and these kinds of sessions have a number of elements to them. So, for example, psychoeducation is provided, talking to the patients through their internet use, talking through with them about the potentially negative consequences for their individual lives, for their academic achievements, professional achievements, etc. Problem identification, very crucial. If the individual isn't aware that they've got a problem, there will be not much that a psychotherapist can do. So we need to establish and really encourage individuals to develop a motivation, an internal motivation to seek treatment. Only then can treatment be beneficial, plus a number of other strategies that are being used. Short-term treatment for internet and computer game addiction has also been used, very often following those kinds of typical CBT elements, and group therapy. Surprisingly, of the reported studies, group therapy in the form of internet-addicted individuals sitting together, discussing their problems, has not been reported. However, what has been reported was family-based therapy. Therapy, having children, their parents, sometimes the teachers together, working together in order to resolve problems that might have occurred in the family situation. Multi-level interventions, very typically, very commonly used in the context of substance-related problems, such as motivational interviewing. Motivational interviewing, I can't stress this enough, it is such a wonderful technique that we can use as clinicians to help individuals who are suffering. Creating the motivation to change, to instill internal motivation, to be able to initiate the therapy process. Very crucial, very beneficial, and the research indicates, yes, this is something that works. Finally, combined treatment has been used in a number of cases. So 6 studies have reported a combination of some form of psychotherapy, primarily cognitive behavioral therapy, in combination with other forms of treatment. For example, motivational enhancement therapy, again, including that kind of motivational element in there, and lifestyle training program, teaching patients, discussing with them other potential coping mechanisms. How can you deal with your life other than just using the internet, engaging in games, spending your time on social networking sites, okay? Increasing communication skills, increasing life skills, and that is so crucial, particularly for individuals, young individuals who spend so much time gaming, growing up with the game, growing up with the technology, and not learning how to interact in social environments, for example. And psychopharmacotherapy, so medication, has also been used in combination with CBT. Similar to what I've said previously, antidepressants are very commonly used, anxiolytics as well, to treat the underlying anxiety problems. And one study reported a very, very innovative treatment. Let me share this with you. I find that fascinating. Electroacupuncture therapy. So you may be aware of acupuncture therapy, which is commonly used. Now, what these researchers and clinicians have done is to use electroacupuncture therapy, where acupuncture is applied with small amounts of voltage, so small electricity, at certain acupoints on the head of the patients. Looks something like that, retained there for about 30 minutes every other day for the treatment period of a few weeks. And it appears that using this electroacupuncture therapy on top of CBT is significantly more beneficial for individuals than actually using cognitive behavioral therapy only. Very interesting results, need to be replicated. So who knows, maybe one of you would like to replicate that kind of study in Turkey. I'd be very interested in the results. Very briefly, I know it's only a very short summary with regards to treatment, but I'd also like to share a couple of things from our own research where I've been talking to psychotherapists who are treating internet and gaming addiction around the world. I've been talking to them a couple of years back, and they have been individuals across a number of different countries, as you can see here. 20 individuals based in 6 different countries: the UK, Germany, Austria, Switzerland, Canada. Have I mentioned them all? Switzerland, thank you. Yes, 6 different countries. I've been talking to these individuals. All of them are considered to be internet addiction treatment experts, as they spend a significant amount of time treating individuals in mental settings, mental health care settings, on average 15 years, and spent an average of 8 years treating individuals specifically for their internet and gaming related problems. And I'd like to share with you a couple of the things that they've said to me with regards to how they treat individuals and what kinds of things they have witnessed in their everyday practice, psychotherapy practice. I know I won't be able to show you much of this, but hopefully I'll give you a little bit of an insight into what they've talked to me about. So on the one hand, we've got a number of risk factors that are associated with internet and gaming use, particularly when they see the individuals coming into their therapy. On the one hand, we've got individual risk factors, including the age of the individuals who are coming to see them, gender, as well as the individual profile, situational characteristics that might increase the risk and that are in line with Schaffer's proximal antecedents of internet addiction and generally the syndrome model of addiction, and structural characteristics, the kinds of internet applications individuals engage in. Let me see which one I can refer to first, given that I won't be able to refer to all of them. This might be an interesting one. One of my participants, one of the psychotherapists from the United States, said the following with regards to the age of the patients. You expose a rat early to the lever. It loves the lever. So now we're giving iPads to 3-year-olds. We're teaching them that if they're bored, instead of being creative and go sing and go outside and play, just punch fingers on this little iPad and you deliver this digital bliss. You actually make them happy by letting them use the technology that basically allows you to feel good and make you not bored and make you entertained. So actually, it's a lot of fun. It takes away their boredom. It might take away their anxiety. It gives them comfort from a very early age. So we're teaching these young rat-like people to push little digital levers. Of course, here using classical conditioning principles in order to show what actually happens in those individuals. Might be somewhat extreme in the way that it's produced here, that kind of excerpt, but I think it gives you an indication about why people use technology, why young people really like to use their technology. Yeah, particularly those who are at very, very early ages. Okay, as regards the profile, typically what we will find in clinical settings are individuals, young men, who are excessively using games. And this excerpt demonstrates that, and I can see I'm running out of time, therefore I will probably just highlight a couple of other relevant factors. Let's see. So, internet applications. Given that particular internet applications or the use of particular internet applications has been associated with an increased risk, I'll give you another example of individuals who are gaming, okay? So one of the psychotherapists that I spoke to said the following to me. There seems to be a natural progression until my clients find MMOs, so massively multiplayer online games, very famous, very commonly used online games, as early preteens or teenagers, so young people actually engaging in these kinds of online games, in massive gaming universes. That's where they can get their social needs met, so they think it's fun, it's exciting. They make friends in the game world. It's easier to make friends in the game than in real life. They can just chat to somebody in the game, somebody who shares their kinds of motivations, who shares their gaming intentions, who's just as interested in the gaming as they are. Those games are very cleverly designed in terms of intermittent reinforcement. The reward schedules that are built into these games are very carefully designed to get them hooked. And then the social aspect is absolutely of critical importance. So think about those intermittent reinforcement. When you're playing these kinds of games, you will find that you can level up quickly. You might be able to actually acquire in-game items that help you to progress in the game more quickly. And those happen at a schedule that is a variable ratio schedule. So not every time that you engage in that gaming activity, you will receive those rewards. Only from time to time you receive the rewards, and that increases the likelihood of actually gaming, continuing gaming, very similar to the principles that are being used in fruit machines and gambling. Okay? Those kinds of principles are also used in gaming, and they might contribute to potentially addictive potentials, increased addictive potentials of these types of games. Have we got time for one or two more? 5 more, okay, 5 minutes, okay, that's great. So I can give you a couple more examples because I hope that you find them, maybe you can see something similar that you've experienced in your own clinical practice as well. Let's see, how about this one? Social media use. So one of my one of the psychotherapists that I talked to said the following. My clients actually believe people want more from them than they actually do, but they certainly feel the sort of relentlessness of ongoing messaging, messages popping up all the time and feeling the need to respond to them, feeling the kind of requirement to get back to the friends that have posted something on your online pages, etc. But concurrently with that is an absolute terror of exclusion. If you don't participate, you're going to be excluded from that social network. There's a lot of peer pressure happening there. Even if people don't necessarily want to engage in technology all the time, for some reason they still feel like they have to be part of the group, to know what's going on, etc. This is something that is very often discussed by patients who are using social networks, sometimes to an excessive degree. Now, the addiction element. Obviously, my psychotherapist would also talk about the extent to which they believe excessive internet use, gaming use, can be considered addiction. And as you can see here, the addiction criteria, some of which I've gone through earlier today, and the ones that Marcus discussed yesterday, are mentioned by all of the psychotherapists. So the individuals that I talk to are of the very clear impression that internet use, excessive internet use, can potentially result in symptoms that are traditionally being associated with substance-related addictions. Let me give you an example. Let's see, mood modification, an interesting one. Virtually most of the women who come here have got a background in abuse, so physical, emotional, sexual abuse, neglect. Difficult situations for these individuals. And what they are doing is that their way of getting away from that abuse is to gamble online. You block it out. And so basically when you're sitting in front of the computer screen or you're in front of a fruit machine, whatever you're doing, you block out the fact of what is really painful. So using the gambling, using the gaming, using the internet in order to cope. Okay? A short-term coping mechanism, very effective in the short term, particularly problematic in the longer term. This is one of the reasons for why people use the internet and different types of technologies. Conflict. I think conflict is a crucial criterion because it really signifies a kind of level of impairment. Characteristically, it turns out that the affected individuals haven't been going to school for a considerable amount of time. So this is referring to teenagers who are using the internet excessively. School absenteeism is an essential symptom. And it turns out that they have neglected their pastime activities and hobbies in the past. They've neglected their social contacts, their circle of friends. They do not do their household chores, but instead their range of behaviors has become focused on the computer and computer games and internet games in the past. So rather than engaging in anything else, the gaming has become the one and main activity in those individuals' lives. Everything else decreases in importance, and that, of course, is very problematic. Now, for those of you who are interested in learning a little bit more about these kind of psychotherapy interviews, all of this information is provided in our book, co-published with Mark Griffiths, Internet Addiction in Psychotherapy. I hope you find it interesting, and I'm afraid I will probably have to wrap up given the limited amount of time. Just with a couple of notes. So, I think it's very important, particularly for us as research community and also clinical community, to think about why do we want a diagnosis of internet addiction. It pulls ahead of any other behavioral addiction, shopping addiction, sex addiction, workaholism, sport addiction. All of these have been considered for inclusion in the DSM-5. Only internet gaming disorder has been included as a potential behavioral addiction in Section 3, in the appendix of Section 3. It indicates a need for diagnostic accuracy and really thinking about research. We need reliability across studies. We need to be able to compare the results of our studies, particularly if we wanted to do cross-cultural work, crucial work. Treatment. We need to know what kind of treatment is effective for whom. How can we know that treatment is effective? We need a diagnosis in order to be able to do those studies and also to find out what kind of treatment works. Social politics. I don't know about the situation in Turkey, but I know that in the UK and across Europe it's very difficult to get funding for internet addiction-related treatments. Very often what happens is that clinicians need to revert to some other primary or secondary diagnosis, depression, anxiety disorders, etc., and then they are able to receive funding for the treatment from the insurance providers. Very problematic. Could talk about that for ages, haven't got the time. Destigmatization of individuals, another important reason for why we might want diagnosis. Now, why do we not want diagnosis? And I promise you, this is my final point. We do not want diagnosis because at the moment there are a number of problems, really a lot of problems in the research community. Are we talking about internet addiction, video game addiction, online gaming addiction? What is it that we're looking at? Lots of papers have been published about this. Myself and my colleagues have been writing about this. It is very problematic. We don't really know what we're talking about. Lots of the studies are referring to internet addiction in the title. When you read the study, actually, it's all about video gaming addiction. Those individuals haven't actually used the internet at all. What is it that we're talking about? Very, very problematic in this case. The issue of whether it is a primary or secondary disorder, something that I've touched upon today. Crucial as well, we don't know. Tolerance. Is tolerance a relevant criterion? Can it be used for behavioral addictions in a similar way that it can be used for substance-related addictions? Again, highly contested. And one of the very, very crucial issues, I'm not sure whether you're aware, but the National Institute of Mental Health is the largest funding provider for mental health-related research. The DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, our psychiatric Bible, has lost for the first time in diagnostic history, they've lost the funding, okay? Basically meaning, we don't know, is a new DSM going to come out ever? Is there going to be a DSM-6? If so, is it going to be funded by the psychopharmaceutical companies? If that was the case, what would that mean? Would that double, maybe triple the amount of mental disorders that are being diagnosed? We don't know. So it remains to be seen what is going to happen in the future. And with this in mind, I shall finally finish with saying that from my experience as both a clinician as well as researcher in the field for many years, I think an official diagnosis is necessary, but both as clinicians and researchers, we need to do significantly more work in order to find out what is the problem, how can we treat it, and how can we actually work together in being able to help those individuals who do need our help. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Dr. Kuss. And it is very, very good presentation. I like it. Thank you. Sayın dinleyicilerimiz, Profesör Daria Kuss özellikle internet bağımlılığının tedavisini böyle 1 saat gibi kısa bir süre içerisinde oldukça iyi bir şekilde özetledi. Özellikle farmakoterapinin kendilerinin yapmış olduğu bir çalışmanın aslında özetini vermiş oldu. Yine psikolojik terapinin işte bu 10 çalışmadan bahsetti. Yine kombine tedavilerin gayet özet bir şekilde sunumunu izledik. Tabii kafamızda mutlaka bazı sorular vardır. Zamanımız da dar. Ben sözü fazla uzatmadan birkaç soru almak istiyorum. 5 dakika gibi bir süremiz var. Çünkü ara vermeden devam edeceğiz diğer oturumlara. Beyefendiye verelim. Buyurun.
Mehmet Çalışkan, Yalova'dan geliyorum. Sunumunuz için çok teşekkür ediyorum. Çok yararlı bilgiler verdiniz bizlere. Teknolojik bağımlılık gerçekten bizi de ülkemizde büyük şekilde sarmış. Bu zararlı alışkanlıkları yerine yararlarını da görüyoruz tabii. Faydaları oluyor teknolojide. Bunun yanında yani biz bu teknolojik bağımlılığı aşabilmemiz için onlara bu faydalı bilgileri beraber sunup onları o etkiden kurtarabilme imkanımız var mı diye bakıyoruz. Soruyorum sizlere. İkinci bir sorum da bu elektroakupunkturla ilgili olacak. Bu elektroakupunktur ülkemizde henüz yerleşmiş bir sistem değil. Bu yasal mıdır? Uygulanabilirliği var mı? Biz ülkemizde bunu uygulayabilir miyiz? Teşekkür ediyorum.
Okay, so if I understand correctly, your question is whether or not it is possible to use novel treatments such as electroacupuncture therapy in order to treat individuals here in Turkey, for example, or in Europe. As far as I'm aware, there is nothing that would speak against using those kinds of therapies because acupuncture is one commonly known treatment for a number of disorders. I think we also need to bear in mind the kind of diagnostic context that we're working with. So what kind of treatment is available in your country? How can you use that kind of treatment? How can you work together as treatment providers, for example, with medical professionals, with sociologists, with physical therapists who are able to provide different kinds of treatments? And I know from my past experience that generally treatment is effective if you can combine this kind of interdisciplinarity of treatment provision. Electroacupuncture might be one of the elements within a holistic, multi-level treatment approach, which might be very efficacious for individuals who are developing problems with their internet use. I hope that answers your question. Yeah? Great.
Evet. Buradaki arkadaşlar.
Teşekkürler sununuz için. Selim Günüç. Şimdi ben oyun bağımlılığının tedavisiyle ilgili bir soru sormak istiyorum. Bazı türlerinden bahsettiniz tedavi için. Şimdi bu tedaviler birçoğunluğu ya da benim bildiğim kadarıyla hepsi aslında başka bozukluklardan transformasyon yapılmış şekiller. Yani oyun bağımlılığında biz bunları başka bozuklukların tedavisinden aldığımız bilişsel davranışsal tedavi gibi. Şimdi benim şöyle bir araştırmam var, daha sonra yapmayı istediğim. Şimdi biz oyun bağımlılığında biliyoruz ki sadece oyuna teşvik eden işte ödüller, level atlaması bu gibi ya da rekabet bunlar değil. Bir de bunun yanında işte kırmızı renginin kullanılması, bir takım seks objelerinin kullanılması bunların da olduğunu düşünüyorum. Acaba oyunu oyunla tedavi etmek mümkün mü? Yani onları oyuna bağlayan bir takım unsurları yavaş yavaş elimine edip bu oyunun içindeki bir takım unsurları yavaş yavaş çıkartarak, mesela biz sigara bağımlılığında şunu da biliyoruz. Sigara bağımlılığında hasta olan kişiler, mesela bir grip olan kişi sigaradan uzaklaşmaya başlar. Hatta bazen nefret eder. Aynı psikolojiyi burada kullanmamız mümkün mü? Bunun hakkında ne düşünüyorsunuz? Çünkü dediğim gibi kırmızı ve seks objeleri gibi subliminal tarafa hitap eden bir takım mesajların biz oyunların içinde olduğunu biliyoruz. Ve bu mesajlar oyunların daha çok oynanmasını sağlıyor. Acaba biz bunları yavaş yavaş elimine ederek ve bu yönde bir tedavi yapmamız mümkün mü? Yani oyunu oyunla tedavi etmemiz mümkün mü? Teşekkürler.
Okay. So, a complicated question. I often get asked a similar question, namely, can we use online therapy for internet addiction? Very tricky, isn't it? Because if you have a susceptibility or a vulnerability for actually using the internet and then using the internet to treat that initial problem, it is complicated. It is very complicated. Now, you're referring to gaming elements that are being included in therapy. I personally am a very big fan of gamification, gamification for education, gamification for mental health, etc. But the extent to which that would work for gamers is questionable. So how would you implement these strategies within those games? Are these going to be already existent games, or are you going to develop new games? Or maybe what you want to do is moderate already existing games by taking out some of the game elements. So you would need to work together with gaming companies, game designers, etc. So I think there are a number of very complicated questions. It's certainly an area that requires further elaboration, but thinking about this, really in psychotherapy treatment, rather than using online game environments themselves, I would use gamification elements in treatment, in actual face-to-face therapy settings, individual therapy settings, group therapy settings, to give patients, clients, things to do in therapy sessions and also outside of the therapy sessions that are structured on a reward system. So if you, for example, if you were to abstain from playing your favorite game for a week, you receive a reward for that. You see? And this might be quite helpful for individuals because they're already so sensitized to receiving those kinds of rewards that maybe those rewards would be beneficial in therapy as well. However, I'm not aware of any research that would use such elements. So maybe there's a possibility in implementing such structures, gamification in treatment, and finding out the extent to which it is actually beneficial. Very interesting question. Thank you.
Peki. Hocam buyurun. Tamam, geldi hocam.
Ben de bu güzel sunum için öncelikle teşekkür etmek istiyorum. Çok kısa bir katkım olacak. Yani internet bağımlılığı ya da teknoloji bağımlılığının bir takım kriter sistemlerinde DSM gibi, ICD gibi yer almaması aslında şu an için bizim böyle bir problemle karşı karşıya olmadığımız anlamına gelmez. Klinik sahada çalışan herkes bilir ki özellikle son yıllarda bunu bir semptom olarak ya da bir sendrom olarak kabul edelim, fark etmiyor. Herhangi bir hastalıkla komorbid olarak ya da yalnız başına çok ciddi anlamda böyle bir popülasyonla, böyle bir hasta grubuyla karşı karşıyayız. Dolayısıyla bazen klinik tanımlamalar, klinik ortaya çıkışlardan çok daha sonra gelir. Bu nedenle aslında özellikle klinik sahada çalışan arkadaşların, psikologların, psikolojik danışmanların ya da hekim arkadaşların, psikiyatristlerin bu anlamda çalışmalarına hız vermeleri, özellikle sınıflama sistemlerine de önerilerde bulunmaları gerekiyor. Çünkü sınıflama sistemleri oluştururken birçok öneri alıyorlar. Klinik alandan gelen öneriler alınıyor. Bu anlamda biz de bunu çok ciddiye almamız gerektiğini düşünüyorum. Tekrar çok teşekkür ediyorum.
Hocam biz teşekkür ederiz katkınız için. Son bir soru alıp bitirmek istiyorum. Burada hanımefendi var arada, hemen bir tane. Son soru, evet.
Merhabalar, çok teşekkür ederim öncelikle sunumunuzdan dolayı. Ben kısaca geçeceğim. İsmim Zöhre, İstanbul'dan katılıyorum, eşya üyesiyim. Facebook hesabı, Twitter hesaplarından bahsettiniz. Peki siz ne kullanıyorsunuz hesap olarak, tek hesap olarak veya Türkiye üzerine düşünürsek nasıl bir hesap önerirsiniz? Tavsiyeniz nedir? Çok önemli çünkü birkaç tane var, kullanmak zorundayız. Sadece dakika koyuyorum kendime, o şekilde ilerliyorum. Sizin ne önerirsiniz? Çok önemli benim için. Teşekkür ederim.
Okay, very good question. What would I recommend? Well, how about ResearchGate? So those of us who are in the research community have recently joined ResearchGate, which is an account that allows us to share our research findings. So if you're a researcher yourself, or if you're just interested in research, internet addiction and gaming addiction research, please join ResearchGate, which allows you to find out more about such problems, and it allows the academic community to come together. Similar accounts, academia.edu, again, for researchers, for us academics, probably quite, or relatively healthy. I don't think any research studies have been published yet on excessive ResearchGate use, but that might be something we may want to consider in the future. But jokes aside, I mean, what kinds of accounts can you use? I've been to a talk yesterday where somebody was talking about, using the internet and using social media with an increased awareness and trying to limit possibilities of risk, cybercrime, identity theft, identity fraud, and also addiction. I think what we need to do, rather than choosing that one account that is going to limit addictive potentials, is to increase awareness of potential problems, is to teach and educate our children, the teenagers, school children, and as well as students about the potential limitations to using social networking generally. I tend to talk to my students about, the impressions they create with their Facebook accounts for future employers, which is of course something that is quite crucial. If I'm thinking about employing somebody for a particular job, what's the first thing I'm going to do? I'm going to check them out on Facebook. I'm going to check them out on Google and see what kind of information is available about them. Now, if I see pictures from last weekend's party where things have got out of hand everywhere all over the internet, then I might have second thoughts about whether or not I want to employ that individual. So really that just gives you an indication about healthy use, proportionate use of using social networking. I don't think it is a reasonable approach to say don't ever use any form of social networking. It's not realistic. Okay, even if we were to say to ourselves, okay, I'm going to delete all my accounts now, I'm going to give away my phone, I'm going to work on a notepad at home, never use my computer again. It's nice ambitions, but unachievable, unrealistic, it's not possible. Thinking about, increasing awareness and teaching that kind of awareness for young generations, but also for parents who sometimes are excessively anxious about their children when they spend time in front of the computers. We need to be aware that technology use can be extremely beneficial. There's so many advantages to it, but for a very small proportion of excessive users, addiction-related problems can be the consequence. I hope that answered your question. And I'm looking forward to seeing you on ResearchGate.